Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hello, Dad. Thanks for having me on the show. The news seems to be doing just what I don't know how much more we can do with that. Going through all the articles this week, they all say the same thing that I've been pointing out, I think. Contention. I mean, even down to this thing about some U.S. servicemen over there being seen with a Kurdish patch on their uniform. And Turkey is saying that's unacceptable. These people are terrorists. This is, they're not wearing a Daesh patch or a Al-Qaeda patch or an Al-Nusra patch or a Boko Haram patch when they're fighting in these areas of the world. What in the world are they wearing a, YPG patch when, from Turkey's designation, these people are terrorists? So it's just contention to me. I see it's just more stuff that for these people to fight about. And there was an article this week about the U.S. maybe talking about how 5 years ago Lockheed Martin stopped producing the F-22 Raptors, what this calls the world's most lethal combat plane. It's ones we talked about a couple weeks ago, Dad, where they had that, what was it called, where they jumped at a moment's notice and flew in a whole wrecking crew over to England and did their drills in these F-22s, that immediate response, that crisis response or whatever it was that led me to ask what kind of crisis, do you anticipate that you got to fly this kind of, you got to be on this sort of preparation level? Why is the world in a state, everybody that's been funded to get into power in their political systems keeps pushing war and arms buildup and contention. Nobody pushes peace. Isn't that funny? You think the way lobbying works, the way the money behind politics, if people wanted peace, don't you think you just start getting platforms that were peace-based and candidates that wouldn't get funded unless they were adhering to peaceful platforms and getting something done, unless you could point to your last term as a president or a congressman and say, look at how much peace, meaning in the sense of how much less fighting there is in the world, how much less expenditure we're asking for this term than we needed last term to fight all the bad stuff in the world, instead of that escalating endlessly and exponentially. So, Dad, I just think the news is, there's not much to it these days until we hear them talking about rebuilding the temple. Then we're going to know we're right at the edge of our end time period. Our final period. What did we read last week in the Bible study out of Luke or Matthew when they asked him what'll be the time that the temple, that when he talked about the temple, Herod's temple being destroyed. And in Matthew's version, it said, what'll be the signs of all these things and your coming? Luke's version, it just says about the temple being destroyed. But he tells them of all these things that are going to happen. He says, but the time is not yet. And that when you see these final signs, everything, all the nations in, not knowing, how did it say, Dad? Is it the heavens should be shaken? Or the foundations of the universe, something like that will be shaken. And And people will be in this tremendous fear, not knowing what to expect on the earth, what's to come. And he says, at that time, lift up your, be courageous and lift up your eyes, because your salvation is at hand. And so I think, it's not really a doomsday scenario. It's a timing thing. This war isn't going to get them what they're trying to get out of it. This new world order never does come to be. Nobody ever, people that have taught me Christianity all my life don't seem to understand that this whole idea of an antichrist ruling the world, where do you get that? That never happens. It says that he goes into the Jewish temple and declares himself God. And the false prophet causes all people, small and great. That just means everybody. Nobody's immune to it. The young, the old, the small, the great. Everybody takes this mark. And I don't see that it's something that's going to be forced, which is why I still say this false prophet could be the United Nations, because it's something that's going to seem to be an answer. And people are going to want it. And in that way, I think there's more time, Dad, between here and there. This is the wars and rumors of wars. This is what's setting the stage, and I think in the more, what I read into the news, it's laying the psychological foundation for conflict and hate and division and a feeling that we need more F-22 Raptors. We need more military to help us with this world that's spinning out of control, without anybody, sort of asking the question, why is it spinning out of control? Is that really just happening organically? Or is there a hand at work creating the chaos? Someone who really wants the war, someone who's building into all these regions and all these religions and all these governments and all these nationalities a reason to fight somebody. A division within divisions. You might be a Muslim, but are you a Shia or a Sunni? And you might be either one of those, but are you a Wahhabi? Are you radical? Are you ready to go die for Allah? Are you ready to go kill those darn infidels for Allah? Right? So even within the Muslim community. And I think that's the pattern that's so prevalent if you want to get it on the level that's closest to us. And then on the level that we're always trying to, or, these days we've been trying to connect the dots, pulling the strings, we're trying to get behind the news and behind the geopolitics as it's presented to us. To the people who, don't wear suits and ties. You don't see them on the news. They don't talk about these guys. These are people that simply have been pulling these strings for several generations now, really. I mean, it kind of goes back, it seems to me, to this end of the 19th century with this Albert Pike and Mazzini and the structure that they were setting up of a secret society, the Cecil Rhodes Foundation and everything that goes on then with that blood diamond money being forever willed to fund these secret societies and their, and what is their goal? To establish this kingdom, this kingdom with a divine right to rule, England, over all the world. And I've been learning a lot of stuff, Dad, that points to the way the people that rule the world, the money still comes through England, the bloodlines, all of our presidents, every single one of them has been related to the royal families of Europe. I mean, it's kind of weird, right? To just think that never once have we elected just somebody, anybody can be president, and yet every single one of them's got some blood linkage to some monarchy from Europe or England, and that these people happen to be the ones that wound up with all the money after the Crusades. And so anyway, the lines seem to be fairly well delineated now that, America's just been a tool It's not this land of the free that we imagine it is. The American Revolution was funded by the same money, the same Rothschild funding on both sides. The Civil War, same thing. The establishment of the currency system finally here with the Federal Reserve System and everything else, right down to the foundations of the people that were, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and all these people that were sort of loaned the money to become the industrialist barons in the days when the money was taking over this country. And, I don't see where that's changed in 100 years. Those people are still, that money still traces back to the same Swiss bank accounts and the same family names and the same blood. Bill Gates hasn't done nothing to upset that, right? He might be some new money in the game because of the increase of money with all these bubbles, with all this digital way in which currency has been printed and expanded and manipulated into these derivatives, right? Where you can bet on the same thing a million ways. Same dollar can turn into $1 million out there in the marketplace. And so, within all that, you're going to get your Bill Gates that wind up, some sort of magnate of his particular industry with a bank full of money. But does that money really buy him a seat at the round table that sets the whole game up anyway? I doubt it. I doubt very much. I'm sure he's taxed just the way the cartel taxes the Mexican businesses, based on how successful they are and what service are they providing and how much money does it make, and as the cartel, how much do they want to allow you to keep making that money? So I say that there's no doubt that operates onto a global financial network as well, in which all these players struggle against each other, but the struggles that are within the general conflicts of interest that are among the few centers of power, right? Let's say all of China as a population has some sort of interest that can't be completely undermined by anybody else's. And so because of that, there's certain things China has to do on the world scene. They have to try and get enough water for their people to drink. They have to try and create enough industry and economy for their people to live. And so the people within that system doing that, that's what they're doing. They're not they're not getting a script. The people at the top that borrow the money, that are ultimately in power and direct the course of the nation, they pretty much get a script in the sense of, if the people say what the people want to do is develop alternative energy and they want to regulate things like transportation and utilities and such like that, well, then somewhere there's going to come the words, no way. Sorry. Think of something else. So the main course is going to stay the same. You're going to be manipulated in general. But within that, all of these different pressure points exist. People that are vying for the same piece of land. And it doesn't matter to the bankers who wins. When I say bankers, I mean the ultimate bankers. This very smallest group of people. They probably don't have too many contentions amongst each other. And that's why they meet in secret several times a year, or their dignitaries meet in secret several times a year to talk about what to do so that they don't waste any of their assets on things that can be negotiated. But meanwhile, there's, you can tell the world is full of turmoil. It's full of tribulation, tribulum, friction, like bone on bone. And there's nothing that can be done about that. In fact, it would seem to be the mechanism by which a very small group of people can manipulate and rule a very large group of people by provoking these bone-on-bone irritations or conflicts and soothing them, provoking and soothing them, provoking them and offering the solution, right? And the more I think of that overall perspective, Dad, the more history seems to have a cohesive, semblance of unity, and it's like a story that makes sense, that a writer's thought through enough to make sure the characters work and all the scenes make sense, and that if someone leaves a scene to go do something in the day and they live in a place where it's going to get freezing cold at night, you don't forget to remember that they need to remember their coat when they leave, because that's what the character would do. And so I think the world we live in is scripted in a certain way like this, in which, we read the Pike stuff about the 3 world wars. What kind of mindset do you have to have? What sort of mechanisms do you need in place to be able to even think this way? That you could create wars at your bidding to work your desires? Who thinks on that level? What would you have to be? What would you have to own? How could you think to even talk like that? Why wouldn't that be obvious nonsense? Well, I always, Dad, keep in my mind when I think about it, I refer back to Carroll Quigley, right? And even 50 years before Quigley, a guy named President Woodrow Wilson, who said, there's a power so organized and so pervasive that you better not even speak above your voice when you speak in condemnation of it. And obviously this is a president. He's speaking in political terms in the sense of making noise in the public ear, making a commotion about these people and their plans, their secret plans. I mean, this is Woodrow Wilson 100 years ago, and then 50 years later you got Professor Quigley pointing out that there's people with an actual plan. You got things at that time like the Iron Mountain Report, which presented, as we've talked about many times, that the only option to war is something people can be eminently afraid of, like either aliens or climate change. This is where the climate change scare came out of, if they think the world is coming to an end. And so ever since then, the world has been coming to an end. And it keeps, it's all part of a psychological warfare against the people. And so I say that the deeper question is, where's that psychological warfare end? What's the plan, you guys? And the more I search, the more I keep thinking it's, depopulation. And so I got looking up some depopulation stuff this week, Dad. And I found this really cool site called internationalpeace.info. But what's funny is I got over here from somewhere else, and nothing within this site works for me. None of the pages come up. Just this one about depopulation of the world. But they've got all these other topics. International news, for instance, which I kept trying to access, but none of the other topics come up. So I don't know if they're just having trouble with the government or, what the deal is, but they're internationalpeace.info. And the page that I'm on here is titled Depopulation of the World. And it's a collection of famous quotes about depopulation. And so, I found this pretty interesting, and I want to read some of these quotes now so that people get an idea that, what we're trying to get at in this pulling the strings, or what I'm trying to get at, is how much of the myth is reality with regards to this, blood sacrifice to Molech, and the worship of demons and black magic, the pursuit of alchemy in its form of sort of dark magic, the dark magic arts of being able to bring curses on someone, or I don't know a whole lot about these things. I just know that it seems to be more than just a Hollywood creation, because it goes back a lot farther than Hollywood. And I'm trying to figure out how much of that these people, and it's these people that I'm going to read to you now, these famous quotes about depopulation. It's these people I'm talking about. How many of them are pure materialists? I say most of them are doing the speaking for those that are behind the scenes. So this isn't necessarily meant to be evidence of sort of the demonic forces, if there are such, behind the men of power in the world. But this is the words coming out from our people and systems, organizations of respect or power in the world. This is the quotes from these people. So this first one, quote, "One CFR published policy objective is substantial worldwide depopulation, including half of the current U.S. population being targeted. This population reduction program is largely funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Merck Fund, both financially and administratively linked to the Merck Pharmaceutical Company, the world's leading vaccine manufacturer. Records show the Merck Pharmaceutical Company received a major share of the Nazi, quote, flight capital at the close of World War II, when its president, George W. Merck, was America's biological weapons industry director. These facts were revealed by Norman Covert, Army Public Relations Director at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, and veteran news correspondent Paul Manning in his book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, printed by Lyle Stewart, Inc. in 1981. This is a quote from Dr. Leonard Horowitz. Okay, I'm not sure when I suppose Dr. Horowitz is quoting this book from 1981. So that shows you how far back Dr. Leonard Horowitz is pointing out that one CFR published policy objective is substantial worldwide depopulation, including half of the current U.S. population being targeted. Okay, so, and that the population reduction program is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Merck Fund, both linked to the world's leading vaccine manufacturer. I mean, come on, with all the talk about vaccines nowadays. And I've seen some stuff, Dad, that people in Africa, they're outright like a militia, like some of the people down in Mexico, the little towns that'll come out, all the men come out with their rifles and get on the road and stop every car to discourage the drug traffickers from coming through their town because of the violence it brings. And so they form their own militia, and boy, oh boy, is it impressive. Well, I've been through a couple of them. You drive up, there's 100 of the men from the town sitting 50 on each side of the road, all with rifles, and nobody smiling. And a couple of them are in the middle of the street with some big thing to stop you. Let me tell you, it's impressive. So you think about what's going on with vaccines. I believe there's more than enough evidence now to link them to sterilization, if not outright genocide in places. So, but here's what's being said 35 years ago, that the world's leading vaccine manufacturers, that this Merck Pharmaceutical received a major share of the Nazi flight capital at the close of World War II. Not sure exactly what that means, but we can infer that means some sort of government handout to its president, George W. Merck, America's biological weapons industry director. I mean, these are coincidences in this world where we're trying to track down who's pulling the strings. So anyway, that's just to establish this idea that depopulation is a real concern and agenda to the string pullers, which are not our presidents and such. They only become that through the policies of our talking heads and mouthpieces. But I'm trying to get back to the string pullers. And so here's someone doing the work of it, obviously. And remember, CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, that's essentially these elitists, the round table groups, as they're called, that do the work for this central organization of people that remain pretty much secret and whose dignitaries and flunkies meet to discuss the goals. And then those meetings result in people in places like the Council on Foreign Relations being told, here's what we want to do. We being whatever that concern, if they're speaking about pharmaceuticals, if they're speaking about education, here's what here's our goal, here's our plan, here's our agenda. Now go get it done. That's what we pay you, politicians, presidents, captains of industry, to do, is do what we tell you to do. Here's a quote. Indeed, it has been concluded that compulsory population control laws, even including laws requiring compulsory abortion, could be sustained under the existing Constitution if the population crisis became sufficiently severe to endanger the society. That's a quote from John P. Holdren, Obama's science advisor, at least at the writing of this thing that I'm reading, from Eco Science of 1977. So this is where this guy Holdren comes from. And they've got a whole list of his quotes, I suppose because he was I don't know how much of this is taken out of context, as I see many of the things are presented to us out of context. Was he saying to do all these things? He believes in all these things? Or are some of these things simply from a larger work where they're presenting the facts? I'm not sure, but the facts are still that this John P. Holdren, who became Obama's science advisor in Eco Science 1977, said that it has been concluded that compulsory population control laws, even including laws requiring compulsory abortion, could be sustained under the existing Constitution if the population crisis became sufficiently severe to endanger the society. And I say that's why you've had nothing but, just like the climate, the world's been coming to an end since then, and too many people, population explosion. And I'm going to argue, Dad, that, that's what we're told, just like we're told that, the lone gunman shot JFK, and, all these kind, airplanes flew into buildings, Al-Qaeda, is ISIS. We're told a lot of things. We landed on the moon. How many of those are true? Right? I don't know. I know a lot of them aren't. And so I find anything the government says, anything the mainstream media says, especially in our day and age, must at least be highly suspect of being tweaked and twisted to tell a story that they want us to hear. So until we discover the truth, it wouldn't make sense to just believe everything they say at face value. But I'm pointing out that there has, in fact, been a cry about population boom and all this out-of-control population. And yet all my life, the kids have been undernourished and starving in Africa. And all the documentaries I've seen in the last 10 or 20 years, it only looks like it's getting worse. Shooting now, they got West Nile, and they've got Zika, they've got AIDS, they got nothing but diseases after disease over there. From what I've seen, nobody's cleaned up anything. The kids are still, malnutritioned and dying. They're still living under conditions of smoke inhalation and all these terrible conditions that make for the highest mortality rates and all these kind of things. So I guess it's not the Africans that are outbreeding everybody, since they've been dying my whole life. And now you see all the evidence of these sterilization programs in places like the Caribbean and Africa, South America. And you see that their numbers are down. You see the Planned Parenthood in America. You see China all my life going on this whole Planned Parenthood. I mean, with all the contraception, with all the Planned Parenthood, with all the death and disease that seems to be just as rampant now as, a couple hundred years ago anyway, how could it be that the population is exploding? So I submit to you that if we really knew the truth, I will bet you the population is decreasing. And how do I say that? What kind of evidence am I going on? Because all of these people have been claiming it's one of the most important things for them to attend to for 40 years. 40 years they've been saying the same thing. World's coming to an end, climate change, and too many people. We got to control the population. We got to control. And apparently, what some of these people are pointing out to us, and I think a lot of it's been borne out in the modern alternative news anyway, that they've worked quite tirelessly on their different programs, whether it be educational programs like Planned Parenthood, the distribution of contraception, or whether it be the clandestine programs like vaccinations and lacing the food, which they talk about all that in here. Quote, adding a sterilant to drinking water or staple foods is a suggestion that seems to horrify people more than most proposals for involuntary fertility control, unquote. John P. Holdren, same guy. So I'm just trying to look. They have so many from John P. Holdren. In today's world, however, the number of children in a family is a matter of profound public concern. The law regulates other highly personal matters. For example, no one may lawfully have more than one spouse at a time. Why should the law not be able to prevent a person from having more than two children? John P. Holdren. So this shows you their frame of reference 40 years ago. We got to control this thing. We got to control. That's what they're being told. Whether those numbers are real or not, it's like saying we're going to the moon, people. We got to get everybody ready. Let's build some facilities. Let's start some training. Let's build some rockets. What do you know as the scientist, all zealous to do that? You don't know whether anybody's ever going to land on. How are you going to know whether they go to the moon or show you a picture of the moon? You're still going to do your part, and your part's going to be just as real. And so these people thinking about it then are claiming all sorts of ways to control the population. And this whole idea of food and water, that's really, Holdren presents it as horrifying, but if I get to more of the right quotes, I don't know if they're in this or something else I read, you can find that became quite what in the modern materialist, scientist, determinist that talks about it, talks quite openly about the fact that, there's going to come a day when they'll just, they'll put in your food, it'll basically sterilize everyone except the ones that qualify. You'll have to get a license to have kids. And when you do, they'll give you the anecdote. You take the anecdote, now you get pregnant. But boy, can you imagine? You'll have to go give them blood tests, and you'll have to do IQ tests, make sure you're a good match, make sure that all the different scientific algorithms and theorems that they've developed to decide whether you and the person that you want to have a baby with should be allowed to have a baby. And then if you get the right to do it, you'll be given the anecdotes and you can have a baby. That's already presented as the only possible way to save the planet from that materialist. That is the future, whether you like it or not. Someday people will be controlled that way because they will have to be, is the argument that they're using. And here it is in its inspiration 40 years ago. The resultant ideal sustainable population is hence more than 500 million, but less than 1 billion. Club of Rome goals for mankind. That's their quote. The resultant ideal sustainable population is hence more than 500 million, but less than 1 billion. See, so they don't say get it down to 100,000 of us. No, half a billion to a billion. That's where the earth, that's the comfort zone they figure. Just enough workers to develop all of the planet without spoiling any of it. Because when you look at where the materialist vision of this comes from, the save the planet, Mother Earth, it's all we've got. You know, it's all about people having to give way to make way for the earth. And of course, there's a certain rational argument that I don't see how any spiritualist can deny. Doesn't make sense, as I'm always pointing out in my own industry of surfboards and water sports stuff, boats and things. Why should we keep making every boat, every board, every paddle, every fin, everything out of some fiberglass that never breaks down? I mean, this stuff's going to be in the earth. So, you know, that's not responsible. Now that we see there's so many people, the exponential growth of recreation and the use of plastics is such that there's hardly anywhere left to throw this stuff but in our own backyards. And therefore, doesn't it make sense to be more responsible and look toward more organic ways of doing things? So from that end of the argument, the very, 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 liberal left end of their argument, of course, it makes perfect sense that if the population is expanding and we're more consumptive and we are in fact utilizing more resources than the earth can reproduce, well, then come on. We owe it to the future generations, which is ourselves in that certain way. We are the future generation from somebody that was behind us. So somebody is the us of the future. And that's not fair to destroy the planet when you have this information. So from the liberal side of the argument, sure, it makes sense to say we must make certain concessions. I agree with that. The point is, what concessions? What are we talking about here? What kind of concessions must humans make for the planet? And of course, it's none of, the elites don't want to stop driving their 500-foot yachts, do they? They don't want to stop all owning 6 different Lear jets, do they? They don't want to stop any of that, right? They don't want to stop the fact that they can zip off to any corner of the world and stay in a fancy hotel and have their butts wiped by servants. They won't stop any of that, do they? So because of that, it takes a different kind of solution. And the solution is to eliminate the mass of humanity. Okay, check this one out. Society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Sounds like something Hitler or Charlie Manson might say, right? Society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Theodore Roosevelt, that's former President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. In order to stabilize world populations, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. It is a horrible thing to say, but it is just as bad not to say it. Jacques Cousteau, 1991. UNESCO. How's that? One of my heroes growing up, and one of the world elite's heroes, Jacques Cousteau, right? Materialist scientist went out there and discovered it, and what did he say? Too many people. In order to stabilize world population, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. Now, it's interesting if you see some of the numbers through wars, the famines, the deaths, the sterilizations. It's staggering how many millions. I remember when I was screaming about Darfur about 10 years ago, Dad, where 3-4 million people they killed over there in that. How long ago was Armenia? How many millions there? I mean, I'm sorry, population's increasing. We're killing people by the millions in this world, according to their own speculatory figures. So that was Jacques Cousteau. I believe that human overpopulation is the fundamental problem on Earth today, and we humans have become a disease, the human pox. Dave Foreman, Sierra Club, co-founder of Earth First. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. Margaret Sanger. That was a quote. Quote, we don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, unquote, Margaret Sanger. The Georgia Guidestones, of course, mimic what the Club of Rome says, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. This one's kind of famous. If I quote, if I were reincarnated, I would wish to be returned to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. That's Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, leader of the World Wildlife Fund. Right? He'd love to see, more bears and tigers roaming the earth for his kind to hunt and shoot, because don't think they don't. They certainly do, because they're the divine, or at least biologically, top of the food chain. But they don't like all these humans that take up the space of the tigers and the bears. A total population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. Ted Turner, founder of CNN. Quote, and advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool, unquote. The Project for a New American Century, Rebuilding America's Defenses, page 60, Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz. Did you hear what that said, Dad? Biological warfare that could target specific genotypes, right? Just Persians, just Asians, just Africans, right? That's their dream weapon, it's like. Could transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. I mean, is that sick to even... Right? And these are modern leaders. Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, just to carry forward, who's in charge and what are they thinking about all us people? Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. David Rockefeller, Honorary Director of the Council on Foreign Relations, Honorary Chairman of Bilderberg Group, founder of the Trilateral Commission, member of the Bohemian Club, praising Chairman Mao, whose policies, this quote says, killed at least 30 million people. I've read another one where it gives him credit for 100 million. So I don't know how many million, but again, here's another, during this modern world where the population boom is so great that the world can't contain it. Mao killed 30 million. We killed 19 million of the North American natives in this country. The Aboriginals were wiped out by the millions. The Africans, as I say, have been being wiped out by the millions my entire life. I mean, I don't know. It puts a whole new perspective on the idea of population boom to me. How are we making up for the sudden deaths of so many people? These 30 million died in a matter of a decade, not in a matter of 100 years. So certainly way beyond the birth rate. So not sure where they get all this stuff. I don't know who this Eric Planka is, some scientist perhaps, or this quote says, every one of you who gets to survive has to bury 9. And the next quote, disease will control the scourge of humanity. This is, Bertrand Russell, even though we're on different sides of the fence, at least he was a thinker. This is a Bertrand Russell quote, philosopher from the early 20th century. I do not pretend that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. There are others which, one must suppose, opponents of birth control would prefer. War, as I remarked a moment ago, has hitherto been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. There would be nothing in this to offend the consciousness weaknesses of the devout or to restrain the ambitions of nationalists. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of that? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's, unquote. So, yeah, we could just, every generation drop a black plague down, wipe out a certain number of them. Quote, the most merciful thing that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. Margaret Sanger. She sounds like a real barrel of laughs, huh? Sorry, I never grew up in her books. Quote, eugenic sterilization is an urgent need. We must prevent multiplication of this bad stock. Margaret Sanger. Eugenics is the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems. Margaret Sanger. The big threat to the planet is people. There are too many. Quote, Sir James Lovelock. My three main goals would be to reduce human population to about 100 million worldwide, destroy the industrial infrastructure, and see wilderness with its full complement of species returning throughout the world, unquote. Dave Foreman, U.S. environmentalist and co-founder of the environmental movement, Earth First. The extinction of the human species may not only be inevitable, but a good thing. Christopher Maines, Earth First. Childbearing should be a punishable crime against society unless the parents hold a government license. All potential parents should be required to use contraceptive chemicals, the government issuing antidotes to its citizens chosen for childbearing. David Brower, first executive director of the Sierra Club. I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding. Theodore Roosevelt, former president of the United States. The Puerto Ricans are the dirtiest, laziest, most dangerous, and thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, 1898 to 1959, Rockefeller Institute. Rhodes also headed 2 large chemical warfare projects, had a seat on the Atomic Energy Commission, and he headed the Sloan Kettering Institute for Cancer Research. Just in case you thought he was an oddball like me, no, he's an insider saying some stuff like that. I have studied with great interest, he told a fellow Nazi, the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would, in all probability, be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. Adolf Hitler. I've studied with great interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction. All right? So if you don't know who Adolf Hitler is, who funded him, where he comes from, again, he's rubbing elbows with popes and Jesuit priests and American industrialists and bankers. From a historical point of view, the first method, which presents itself as execution, its value in keeping up the standard of the race should not be underestimated. This is out of Applied Eugenics, which also devoted a chapter to lethal selection, which operated, quote, through the destruction of the individual by some adverse feature of the environment, such as excessive cold or bacteria, or by bodily deficiency. This is 1918. Again, in case you think it's some lunatic, well, it is, but in case you think it's not a lunatic that's helping to run our world today, 100 years ago, Dr. Paul Popenoe, the Army venereal disease specialist during World War I, co-wrote the widely used textbook, Applied Eugenics. This is the guy who values execution to help keep the race pure. Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns, we should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses, and court the return of the plague. Thomas Malthus. The AIDS epidemic, rather than being a scourge, is a welcome development in the inevitable reduction of human population. If it didn't exist, radical environmentalists would have to invent it. Again, Dave Foreman, founder of Earth First. We have to take away from humans in the long run their reproductive autonomy as the only way to guarantee the advancement of mankind. Alexander Graham Bell advocated passing laws, with success in some states, for compulsory sterilization of people deemed to be, as Bell called them, a, quote, defective variety of the human race. AIDS and other diseases will be the cover story for the decimation. The real causes will be starvation, contaminated water, toxic vaccines given to people who are already immune suppressed, wars, and of course, stolen farmland. 2003, Depopulation and HIV by John Rappaport. So there's somebody on to Bill Rappaport. Dad and I have been reading his stuff for years, and he really does seem to be on to most of it. I don't think he'll talk about 9/11, or maybe he does, but anyway, that's certainly a lucid insight. AIDS and other diseases will be the cover story for the decimation. And of course, starvation, as I said, has been going on my whole life. Contaminated water, it's amazing how that, knowing that primary water is right under the Earth's crust. I mean, it really is easy access to pure water. But instead, we have contaminated water. These vaccines, wars, of course, which have been never-ending, and farmland being, the stolen farmland. People can't grow their own food. In fact, I've been talking to some friends who keep me abreast of the different changes back in the crazy land, Disneyland of the United States and Canada and those kind of places, in which it's becoming increasingly more prevalent, these laws that take away, don't let you even grow food on your own piece of property. It's illegal. They'll come in and arrest you for it, pull up your crops, tell you can't do that. You got to go down to Safeway and buy our processed foods. Investigations by EIR have uncovered a planning apparatus operating outside the control of the White House whose sole purpose is to reduce the world's population by 2 billion people through war, famine, disease, and any other means necessary. It's out of 1981, the Haig-Kissinger Depopulation Policy by Lonnie Wolf. So, see, I don't know, how true is that? All I know is when you look at everything they're saying, don't tell me there's more people now. They've been spending 40 years trying to kill people, recognizing they have a population problem and doing everything in their power, from starving them to death, to vaccinating them to death, to sending them into wars, to stealing their opportunity, to just make, letting them kill each other through gang violence, anything, push them over the edge, whatever it takes. So anyway, that appears to be so much easier to delineate than this population boom. Where's that happening? In the cities, you mean, where they're packing everybody next to their dark satanic mills? Keep talking about population boom. They own all the foundations that do the counting. They own all the media that tells you this. 1 million Armenians and 30,000 Kurds were killed in this country, Turkey, and I am the only one who dares to talk about it. Orhan Pamuk, Observer, October 2005. 1 million Armenians. Are the Armenians, you think, repopulating that fast, Dad? Or could we, if you just start chinking off all the places at war, the Middle East certainly can't be in a population boom. It's just, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense. They're killing them as fast as they can and telling us how there's too many people. I don't know what this is from and the reliability of this, but let me just read you. Apparently, it was a decision reached by the secret government The final decision was made in the White House in 1972 on the basis of a meeting of world leaders under Nixon. A friend of mine got the notes from that. He's now in prison, and he talked about it publicly in 1974. He said that they had the meeting and agreed that the planet was overpopulated and that it had to be reduced. The decision was to reduce the population from 5 billion, which it was at that time, to 1 billion by the year 2000. They were to use any and all means to do this. They believed that the earth could only handle 1 billion inhabitants. Their problem was how to exterminate 80% of the world population in 30 years. They modified the figure to be 2 billion by 2000, but the AIDS thing is going to take care of a good part of that for them. The latest figures coming out of Washington indicate that Africa is now as good as doomed. In another 10 years, 75% of Africa will be dead. So this might all be part of the hype that was taken too far. This is from Preston Nichols and Al Bielek from something called Orion Technology and Other Secret Projects. Somebody's reporting. Anybody can say anything. I'm trying to find. Society is being weeded out right now as minority species are being eliminated very specifically by biological germ warfare and other tactics meant to ensure the elimination of those less genetically favorable. Our food is being tampered with by the insertion of food additives and substances like aspartame. They view this as a massive genetic cleanup. From Thanks for the Memories, the memoirs of Bob Hope's and Henry Kissinger's Mind Control Slave by Bryce Taylor. So that's just more hearsay, I suppose. A lot of these quotes they have in here are things that are quoted out of somebody's book. So, while I say there's still some interesting stuff in here. Oh yeah, and then what happened in Iraq with the sanctions, millions. This last line in this says, the cost in lives was staggering. Between 1991 and 1998, reported UNICEF, 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 died. If you include adults, said Halliday, the figure is now almost certainly well over 1 million. And, so there's another mill in 7 years. Are they reproducing that fast? Seems like population of the planet's actually going down, not up. Okay, so I want to, if I have time here, Dad, I wanted to quote, I found some other place that had a few more actual quotes. Let's see, here's the full quote from Theodore Roosevelt, president from 26th president from 1901 to 1909. Quote, society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Any group of farmers who permitted their best stock not to breed and let all the increase come from the worst stock would be treated as fit inmates for an asylum. Someday we will realize that the prime duty, the inescapable duty of the good citizens of the right type is to leave his or her blood behind him in the world, and that we have no business to permit the perpetuation of citizens of the wrong type. The great problem of civilization is to secure a relative increase of the valuable as compared with the less valuable or noxious elements in the population. The problem cannot be met unless we give full consideration to the immense influence of heredity. Right? This is a guy, I say, who's related somehow to the Queen of England or one of those people. Okay, so this President of the United States is what he thinks. Some people are better than others. This is still part of his quote. I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding, and when the evil nature of these people is sufficiently flagrant, this should be done. Criminals should be sterilized, and feeble-minded persons forbidden to leave offspring behind them. The emphasis should be laid on getting desirable people to breed. How's that? Nice, huh? Oh, Roosevelt, when he may. They have in here also this quote from that Dr. Cornelius Rhodes of the Rockefeller Institute about the Puerto Ricans and doing his part in killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. This one goes on to within that quote to say, all physicians take delight in the abuse and torture of the unfortunate subjects. Again, that may be taken out of context. Julian Huxley, the first director of UNESCO, brother of Aldous Huxley, who, of course, is a famous philosopher, writer of the time, wrote Brave New World, which we talk about a lot on this show. Anticipated people would be gotten to love their slavery and consent to their own entombment into this matrix. So Julian Huxley said, quote, political unification in some sort of world government will be required, even though any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible. It will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake so that much that is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable. Of course, the thinkability is of the eugenic realization that Theodore Roosevelt was screaming about. No farmer, lets his best stock not breed and lets his worst stock breed. So yeah, if you consider humans like animal stock, and apparently these people do, since this is how they're talking about it, Harry Truman, president and CIA founder, if we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia's winning, we ought to help Germany. And that way we let them kill as many as possible. Right? Kill as many as possible. Barbara Marx Hubbard, who apparently is still alive, at least was at the writing of this, quote, out of the full spectrum of human personality, 1/4 is destructive. They are defective seeds. In the past, they were permitted to die a natural death. The elders, the destructive 1/4, must be eliminated from the social body. Fortunately, you are not responsible for this act. We are. We are in charge of God's selection process for death. We come to bring death. The riders of the pale horse are about to pass among you. Grim reapers, they will separate the wheat from the chaff. This is the most painful period in the history of humanity. This apparently is from a discussion in 1997, Dad, from William S. Cohen, U.S. Secretary of Defense. Quote, there are some reports, for example, that some countries have been trying to construct something like an Ebola virus, and that would be a very dangerous phenomenon, to say the least. Alvin Toffler has written about this in terms of some scientists in their laboratories trying to devise certain types of pathogens that would be ethnic specific so that they could just eliminate certain ethnic groups and races. And others are designing some sort of engineering, some sort of insects that can destroy specific crops. Others are engaged even in an eco-type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. So there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror upon other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts, and that's why this is so important. And this is something from Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist. In the 1920s and 30s, scientists from both the political left and right would not have found the idea of designer babies particularly dangerous, though of course they would not have used that phrase. Today I suspect that the idea is too dangerous for comfortable discussion, and my conjecture is that Adolf Hitler is responsible for the change. Nobody wants to be caught agreeing with that monster, even in a single particular. The specter of Hitler has led some scientists to stray from ought to is and deny that breeding for human qualities is even possible. But if you can breed cattle for milk yield, horses for running speed, and dogs for herding skill, why on earth should it be impossible to breed humans for mathematical, musical, or athletic ability? Objections such as, these are not one-dimensional abilities, apply equally to cows, horses, and dogs and never stopped anybody in practice. I wonder whether, some 60 years after Hitler's death, we might at least venture to ask what the moral difference is between breeding for musical ability and forcing a child to take music lessons, or why it is acceptable to train fast runners and high jumpers, but not to breed them. I can think of some answers, and they are good ones, which would probably end up persuading me. But hasn't the time come when we should stop being frightened even to put the question? So there's a more reasonable mind looking at it in that rational fashion, calling it the idea of designer babies, which is what I was speaking about, which, as I say, this is not new. This is old. The idea that, you get a license from the state. They check you out. They decide that you should breed. You should add another person to this world. Otherwise, no, you don't get to. I guess, and none of this is anyone, I know in the deeper discussion, they do, but I haven't seen any of these people presenting this as imagining that the sort of generations which follow would not be anything like we people. We would have altered the reality that we're trying to preserve. The reality that we've preserved is one of a mix of people and of the most unlikely characteristics somehow and sometimes rising to the top over ones that seem more naturally suited. I mean, they make lots of movies about that now. It's a main narrative in the movie string. The by the book person is never as effective as the one that uses their heart and flies by the seat of their pants and embraces the force and the moment. And so they've been teaching us that for a long time, and yet what they think they can do is take that person and breed those qualities into the next one as if those are qualities that can be bred, like speed in a racehorse or milk volume from a cow. And, it seems that if Dawkins is going to present it as we don't know that it's impossible, then I say that we've had a lot, they've been trying to do such things, and perhaps what they found is it's not really practical. You don't, in fact, get the sort of mental being just through some algorithm of breeding process. And so I imagine that in an even deeper matrix and even sicker science fiction perspective, they don't care about the brain. They're looking for physical attributes to breed, which they probably have found they can do. They can breed taller, stronger, whatever, more better baby makers, something like that. And then they can use other technologies to give those designer babies the mental and psychological attributes that they want them to have to fill in their utopic science fiction society. Anyway, I don't know where you go from this, where else is there to go from an idea of a eugenic reality and this population control. It's one thing if 90% of the population does happen to die naturally because of a flood or a comet hits the earth or those kind of, that's what the people on the other side that I've read usually say, that the planet's never had a problem in all the thousands of years that we're aware of people living on it. It's never had a problem with overpopulation of any species. A balance always finds, if too many of something comes, then a problem ensues and balances it. And so, in a way, those people are trying to look at our modern world as that problem that has ensued. And their solution is that they have to cull the earth if they want to maintain their way of life, if they don't want it all to just crash and burn and everybody, including themselves, start over from the ashes. So no, they want to control the population, not necessarily reduce is the first part, but then control through eugenic science fiction, or what to them would be science fact. The eugenic idea that they can keep stabilize, as they say, stabilize the population growth. So I really believe all that's a red herring, Dad, just like climate control. I really, the more I think about it, it's like the idea of, look at everything we get up in our face. Russia and China are great enemies, and, all of the mainstream media, the politics, just the song and dance, the wag the dog world. Why shouldn't this be included? Why wouldn't it be included? Climate change, global warming, population is out of control. It all started at the same time. So I really think that it ties into a deeper agenda that has to do with, they're not just planning a third world war. They're planning the world after the war. The war is to get to something. Just like the first war was to accomplish something, to, Pike, if we're going to believe what it says, is to bring about this, Luciferian doctrine in the open. They can finally, the people that are behind the curtain, they're tired of being behind the curtain because of religious superstition and what to them would amount to stupidity, hypocrisy, as we study in these esoteric teachings in the mystery schools and such. These people think that they really have knowledge. They're looking at life on a deep dimensional level, and something that they're really trying to achieve, and to return to a golden age of humanity living on the planet with no war and all the animals, plenty of animals, and all this kind of, they have this golden age in mind. And a will to bring it about, and an ever-increasing technological capacity to aid them in that desire. And I say that's, the other side of our eschatological look of where we're at, which is, waiting for these guys to declare that they're going to rebuild the temple or some other 7-year covenant. I believe it will have to do with the temple being rebuilt, but some 7-year covenant made with many is certainly going to be a sign I'm, waiting to hear in the news. And then meanwhile, I'm watching these guys, and, what do they really want to do? It would seem they're moving forward on their plans to start over the world differently. And I say, Dad, that's why they haven't reinvested in America for so long. Other than the new companies building their new buildings, right, all that new money and stuff, you don't see America built the way they built Europe. You don't see them quarrying stone and building edifices to last for centuries and centuries. And I wonder why. These people come from that heritage. These are the kind of people that worship the Great Pyramid in Egypt and such. Why don't they ever want to build anything to last like that? And I think it's because this modern era of man, the people who are running them, especially these last 100 years, as the technology has provided for these expansion of cities and these high-rise buildings and such, the people at the top of that know that they're approaching the end of their scheme, when there's going to be wars. And are they going to bring the cataclysms on the earth? Or is that a natural thing that they know about from their secret knowledge? Is that one of the things they're handing down? These time clocks from the ancients that tell them when and what, and that they're coming to this time when the earth's going to be hit by meteors or something, and it's going to wipe out most of the planet except for the few that hiding in these big caves or whatever. And so they're putting out any other story to deceive the world, and what they're hanging on to is the secret knowledge that that's coming. Well, if you knew that was the case, you wouldn't build your cities to last forever, would you? If you knew that you were living in a time, even if it was in the next 100 years or whatever, your kids were going to live through it, your grandkids were going to live through it, somebody was going to live through this time of ultimate destruction and starting over? Wouldn't you want to wait and do the rebuilding like the Sphinxes and such in your new golden era when you started over? Because I've always wondered why, with all their money and all, they can fly into space, they can build another Hubble telescope or build another Raptor jet airplane that they don't need. They can build another space shuttle or, any of these projects they take on that cost fortunes upon fortunes. And yet they can't see fit to keep the school systems in America top notch with all the best equipment and sort of all the latest, when you fly. This last year I flew to Europe and I went through Zurich, Switzerland. And what you notice is how sort of high tech it all, that's their thing. A lot of that futuristic look with screens that are changing from one ad to the next or one thing to the next, and people movers and a lot of glass and stainless steel, and it looks all very futuristic and like they think they know something, and like they're so progressive. But I noticed that in America, there's very few things that we build like they're intended to be here a long time. And when the stuff starts breaking down, our dams, our roads, our bridges, we're reluctant to rebuild those things. That doesn't make much sense, does it? I mean, when you think, those are the things that keep your income coming in, keep people going to work. That's what keeps the status quo. And so when I look over my life, Dad, I think, you see them doing just enough to keep the status quo and expanding within that framework of their own game plan. But they don't build roads and bridges and edifices in America to last very long. And the farther you go out west to California, the shorter the attention span and the thinking seems to be as far as how long these things are supposed to last. I don't know if that's a clue or not, but I just think, gosh, if you're one of these people that owns castles, I mean, what are the people that own castles? You think they don't have nothing to do with the international? I mean, the Rothschilds are known to own most of the castles in the world, so come on. These people know what it means to build a garden, own a castle, build something that's going to be around 1,000 years. If that was me, why wouldn't I be wanting to do something like that? Unless I had some idea that this America that I was using as an industrial sort of mill, was going to be destroyed and turned back into a nature land. And I guess I'll close, Dad, by pointing out that some of these modern things now, these, what is it, agenda something. Agenda 21, I think, 21st century agenda, is that it? Agenda 21, and all these different maps they've made and such things that have come out. Is that there just to scare people? Maybe. But again, it fits into this plan. It fits into this idea that if we know through our eschatology there's going to be a mass elimination of people on the planet, you think they don't know that? And so I say they're preparing for that too. That's what you see going on in the world is mass extinction. And not mass extinction, but mass depopulation of the planet and a starting over. And that's why right now it's sort of a free-for-all, using everybody's money to just build guns, let the bridges go to hell, the schooling's just to indoctrinate these poor kids that are going to be used as cannon fodder anyway. And where nothing has a seriousness. Building all this plastic and dumping it in the ocean, and we go have these, these summits and these meetings, but does it become the important thing on our news channels? Nope, same old dog and pony show on the news channels. Donald Trump and the Academy Awards and, who's screwing who's killed who, terrorism. None of the issues that really would be important in a long-term thinking society that's planning on being around a while. What are we doing in our education system? How are we providing for our children who are taking out these student loans and don't even have anywhere to go into the workplace and all this kind of stuff. All this banking scams and no money for small businesses. No way for that system to work. So I say again, somebody's pulling the strings. Somebody's got it going the way they want it because it's not supposed to work. That's not where they're putting their money. It's a temporary thing going on right now. They're fighting for their hierarchy in the new world is all I can imagine. Everybody that's in on an inside track, that things are going on that aren't being presented in the news, the real life. Those people, they all want to be they all want to be winners. They want to be survivors. They want to be one of the 10 that makes it. And so that's what I think is going on in the world. They're all positioning for that, where we read in the scripture just this last week, Jesus telling the disciples, when you see all this stuff, the nations going crazy, losing heart because they don't know what's coming next in the world, have courage and lift up your eyes, because now's the time. So I say in that sense, it's encouraging to people like us, Dad, that, the world's falling apart, but darn it, it kind of was in Jesus' time. Ever since they left the garden, it seems like falling apart, going away from God, living a life of tribulation is what we've been meant to do in order to know what the grace of God really is. And now that our salvation is coming near, we're seeing all those signs. We're seeing the world come apart at the seams. And we're watching for this eschatological pattern or this prophecies through the eschatology of Daniel to see this, that it's centering around Jerusalem, and noticing that that's also where the Masons that want to rebuild the third temple, these secret societies, they center on Jerusalem. The Zionistic movement that everybody is so keen to point out is behind America's government and seems to be they're the only people not threatened by ISIS. They're the only people winning in all this, is this Zionistic concept. So those things can't be ignored as part of this move to rebuild the temple now, and that this is going to be the catalyst into something. What is the something? We know from our eschatology, it's going to be this cataclysm that's going to come to the earth, this Armageddon that we talk about, and then every island is going to be moved from its place. Something's going to happen on this earth. And I'm beginning more and more to think that that's one of the mysteries, that the people who guard these mysteries, that's one of the reasons they're guarding it. And one of the things they're guarding is that they know that something's coming, and it's probably coming soon. In the long-term sense, we used to be every year, we've been waiting every year, and still the conditions are ripe for this 7-year covenant. The conditions are ripe for this white horse, good caliph to come on the scene, the unsealing of Revelation. I say that's all true, but it's been ripe for 30 years, and I say that it could be ripe for 30 more. And so we have to keep watching and paying attention to the signs of the times. And I say the signs right now is wars of rumors of wars, buildup of weapon, hostilities. But Jesus said, don't be alarmed at that. There's going to be signs in heaven, remember. This covenant's going to be, after that, you're going to have 2 witnesses. You're going to have this rebuilding of the temple. You're going to have this image they build on the temple that the false prophet causes to come to life. So we got a lot of stuff coming as far as signs we're watching for. So we're not going to miss anything. Anyway, Dad, thanks for having me on the show. I'll talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube, or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. and comment. Drop us a line. Subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.